Someone handed me a spare key in a Ziploc bag on a Sunday afternoon, as if I were a distant cousin visiting for the weekend. It was my front door key. It's the same door I had walked through for 34 years. It's the same door I painted teal in 1992, when the twins were still in middle school and their father was halfway out the door for good. That key, scratched, bent at the corner, still with the little pink rubber topper I'd added to help with my arthritis, was now being returned to me. Not with a fight, not with a scream. It's placed quietly on the kitchen counter by my daughter-in-law as she busied herself unpacking a grocery bag. She didn't say it loudly, but she didn't have to. It's just 5 words, spoken with the weight of erasure. You're just visiting now, okay? I'm Eleanor Hart. I'm 69, and that was the moment I knew I had been let go. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. It wasn't my son who said it. Not exactly. He was in the garage tinkering with something useless, probably pretending not to hear. But it had been coming for years. Hadn't it? The subtle shift. The guest towels are in the linen closet. The way they stopped saying your room and started saying the back room. The calendar magnet that no longer listed my doctor's appointments but was instead filled with summer camps and spin classes. My fridge became theirs. My kitchen, their meal prep station. My silence, a space they stretched into. That house was the last place I'd heard my husband's laugh. It's the last place I stood barefoot in a kitchen holding a bowl of batter, humming Patsy Cline. The window over the sink looked out onto a maple tree that I had planted with my father's ashes, scattered at its roots. And now it was a stopover, not a home. They moved in after Alan died. My son, his wife, and their 2 little girls. He asked if I'd mind. Just for a bit. He said, a year, maybe 2. Until they got on their feet. He'd lost his job. Was expecting again. I remember nodding. I even helped repaint the nursery, but a bit turned into a decade. And somewhere in that time, I stopped being the homeowner and became the woman who knocked before entering her own living room. I used to think letting go would be louder. More doors slammed, more screaming matches. But this wasn't that. This was silence. This was being quietly replaced by Amazon boxes, yoga mats, an air fryer I didn't recognize, and the absence of my own photographs from the hallway. I remember staring at that key in the bag, my hand resting on the counter, her words settling, like dust. You're just visiting. No protest left my mouth. I simply nodded, as if she just reminded me the trash went out on Thursdays. I walked to the guest room, now my room, and sat on the edge of the bed that once belonged to my youngest daughter before she moved to Portland and stopped calling. The walls were a dull beige now. It used to be lavender. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there thinking about how many lasagnas I'd baked in that kitchen, how many stitches I'd sewn into Halloween costumes, how many fevers I'd broken on that worn-down couch. And now I was a guest, a woman they spoke about in the third person when I left the room. I looked at my hands, the same hands that had buttoned their shirts for picture day, that had written checks for community college, that had held back every word I wanted to say each time I was talked over at the dinner table. It had taken 16 years to be this invisible. When the morning came, I made coffee before anyone else was awake. Sat at the same table where birthday candles had once melted onto frosting, and where Alan used to read the newspaper while scratching his chin. The key was still in the Ziploc. I picked it up, turned it over in my palm. They had made me a visitor in my own life, but I hadn't signed anything. And they had forgotten who the house really belonged to. So I made it quiet. Plan, no announcements, no confrontations. It's just the kind of silence that carries a woman into the next chapter of her life. But first, I let myself cry once in the shower, where no one could hear, where my sobs could mix with water and disappear. By the time breakfast was on the table, I was smiling again. Calm, invisible maybe, but not powerless. They thought they'd written the last chapter of my story. They didn't know I was just beginning a new one. And this time, I'd be the only author. It's strange how easily a person can forget the weight of their own love. There was a time when the house was filled with noise. Good noise. Not the kind that buzzes and drains you like fluorescent lights and passive-aggressive sighs. I mean the kind that wrapped around your ribs and made you feel like you were exactly where you belonged. The clatter of cereal bowls before school. The squeals of toddlers dancing in footy pajamas. Alan's boots hit the mat after his shift at the station. Even the old dog Bailey used to thump his tail against the floor when I walked by, and I moved through it all. Not like a ghost, not yet, but like the spine of the whole thing, quietly, holding everyone upright. I cooked like it was a language, like every stir and simmer was a sentence they could understand. I've packed lunches even when they were old enough to make their own. Wrote little notes on napkins. Good luck on the test. Proud of you. Don't forget you're loved. Half the time I think they threw them away without reading them, but I wrote them anyway. There were years I don't even remember living in, just surviving through. I kept that house running while Alan worked double shifts, and we took in his niece after her mother overdosed. That girl lived in the attic room for 2 years. I drove her to therapy every Wednesday at 4:30. She sends a Christmas card now every year without fail. This is a small act of kindness. I kept calendars in triplicate. I kept one calendar on the fridge, one in my planner, and one in my mind, for the things that mattered but never got written down. Tooth fairy money, permission slips, who liked mustard and who didn't. I remembered everything so they didn't have to. When Alan got sick, I stopped working. I sat beside him through every chemo drip, every bad scan, K, and every quiet moment where he'd just hold my hand like it was all he had left. I cleaned his bed sores, K. I cut his toenails when he couldn't reach. K sang to him sometimes, real soft, so the nurses wouldn't laugh. He died on a Thursday morning. I had just stepped into the kitchen to warm up his oatmeal. By the time I came back, he was gone. Just like that, I sat beside him anyway, spoon in hand. The oatmeal went cold. The kids were already grown by then. They cried, sure. They showed up in suits and dresses they never wore again. Said nice things at the funeral, but by the next week, they were back to their lives. Back to traffic and time cards and school pickups. I didn't blame them. Not then. The house started to feel bigger after that, not in a luxurious way. In the way a sweater feels too loose once you've lost weight you didn't mean to lose. There were too many chairs, too many rooms with lights off. I took to sitting in the kitchen long after the dishes were done, just staring at the window, waiting for a reason to get up. So when my son called, when he asked if they could move in, it felt like a rescue. He said they'd pay rent. They never did. But I didn't care at first. I just wanted laughter in the hallways again. Wanted juice boxes in the fridge and tiny socks on the line. Wanted someone to say mom in a way that meant I still need you. I gave them everything. Bedroom, for one. It had the best light and the ceiling fan. I moved into the smaller room near the washer and told them I preferred it. I didn't. My closet space disappeared. Then the garage filled with their boxes. My sewing machine was shoved into a corner beside holiday decor I didn't recognize. Slowly, the photos on the walls changed. My wedding picture ended up in a drawer. A quote in cursive lettering took its place. Something about gratitude. I babysat most weekends, even when I had plans. The girls were sweet, I'll say that. Of them started calling me Lola instead of Grandma. Said it sounded cooler. I didn't mind. I'd sit with them and do puzzles, braid hair, and heat up dinosaur nuggets. I'd listen to them talk about things I didn't understand. YouTube, Roblox, slime. I learned enough to be part of their world. I tried. There were bills I paid that weren't mine. Electric, gas, a few repairs. Once, I wrote a check for $2,300 when their car broke down. My son said he'd pay me back. That was 4 years ago. I never asked again. He looked so tired that day. And I remembered the way he used to crawl into bed with a fever and beg me not to leave him alone. That version of him never really left my heart. I watched birthdays come and go. I made cakes that nobody asked for, wrapped gifts in tissue paper I saved from the year before. Sometimes they took photos without me in them, not on purpose, just no one thought to include me. I'd smile anyway. I kept telling myself it wasn't about me, that it didn't matter who took the picture as long as the memory was made. Even when the house started to feel like it belonged to someone else, I held on. I folded laundry that wasn't mine. I kept groceries stocked. I kept silent too. When they argued in the hallway, when she rolled her eyes at the way I washed, the dishes when they left for dinner without inviting me, I told myself this was love, that mothers give and they don't ask, that this is what family looks like, worn out, tired, but intact. But love, I've come to learn, should not make you disappear. And that's what was happening. I was fading, not in some poetic way. In the way old wallpaper peels behind a new bookshelf. In the way a voice gets drowned out when no one's really listening. Still, I didn't speak. I told myself I was lucky, that any company was better than none, that being needed. Even just for childcare or groceries was enough to keep me whole. But I was wrong. They didn't need me. They needed the space I had made for them. And I kept giving it like a woman pouring from a cup she hadn't refilled in years. Looking back now, I see the ways I betrayed myself. Not all at once, but over and over. Every time I smiled instead of spoke. Every time I let myself be interrupted, dismissed, or overlooked. All the times I made myself small so they could stretch out and feel big. No one asked me to, not outright, but I knew the rules. You don't rock the boat when the grandkids are asleep upstairs. You don't say what you feel when they already call you too sensitive. You don't reclaim a room when someone else has put up curtains in it. So I waited, watched, loved them anyway. But 100 tiny wounds still bleed, even if no one sees them. And sometimes it's the love you gave without receipt that makes the silence feel the loudest. There wasn't a single moment that did it. That's the thing people don't always understand. It's not one blow that breaks you. It's the weight of 100 quiet hurts, layered like dust on a bookshelf no one bothers to clean. You only notice it once the light hits a certain way. And by then, it's everywhere. It started with little things. My coffee mug was moved to the back of the cabinet. I'd always kept it in the front row, left-hand side, second shelf. A small white ceramic cup with a fading sunflower print. Mother's Day gift from 1987. I searched for it one morning and found it. Pushed behind a row of new travel tumblers, sleek, color-coordinated, impersonal. I pulled it forward and set it on the counter, hoping someone might remember. The next morning, it was gone again. I didn't ask. I didn't accuse. I simply reached for a different cup. But something inside me shifted. That quiet little movement, like a crack beginning inside a wall. They stopped telling me when they were leaving the house. I'd come out of my room and the house would be empty. Lights off, silence humming, no note, no call. Sometimes they'd return hours later, arms full of shopping bags, the girls half asleep in the back seat. I'd pretend I hadn't been waiting. Pretend I hadn't made a pot roast that went untouched. There were dinners they had without me. Takeout ordered and eaten in the living room. Wrappers tossed, movie already halfway through. I would hear them laughing from down the hall. That laugh. My son's. It used to be my favorite sound. Now it reminded me of a room I no longer belonged in. One day, I found the thermostat locked. They'd put one of those plastic covers over it. Said it was for the kids to keep them from playing with the buttons. But I knew better. They thought I was running it too high. I overheard her once, my daughter-in-law, saying I had dessert blood, always keeping the house like a sauna. The lock made the message clear. My comfort was optional. There were new rugs in the hallway, new curtains in the living room, furniture moved. A bookshelf I'd kept near. The fireplace, the one with Alan's baseball cards, our wedding photo, and the children's baby shoes, was suddenly gone. So when I asked about it, she said, "Oh, we're just rotating things, simplifying." The box was in the garage, shoved behind a stack of exercise equipment. I opened it one night. The smell of cedar and thyme hit me. I touched the edge of our photo frame. Alan in that awful brown suit he wore in the 80s, and me with a perm I still regret. We looked young, happy, real. That photo used to sit next to the lamp by the couch. Now it was buried beneath a set of resistance bands and unopened board. Games, phone calls became rare. My oldest daughter called only on birthdays and Christmas. My middle child, the one who used to lay her head in my lap while I played with her hair, hadn't visited in 3 years. Busy, they always said. Busy with work, with the kids, with life. I stopped trying to explain what silence can do to a person. They wouldn't understand. Once, I left a note for my son. A list of groceries we were low on, some toothpaste, coffee filters, maybe fruit. He crumpled it up before even reading it. They said they use a grocery app now. Everything delivered. You don't need to write things down anymore, he told me. I picked up the paper from the trash after he left, smoothed it out. I folded it neatly and tucked it into my Bible. I don't know why. Maybe to prove I was still paying attention. And then there were the holidays. Always a quiet ache. Those days. Easter with store-bought pies. Not the lemon meringue I'd made every year since I was 23. Thanksgiving with a catered menu that came in plastic trays. I tried to help once, offered to make the stuffing. She smiled like I was a child offering mud pies and said, "We've got it handled, thanks." I went upstairs and cried into a dish towel, not because I wasn't needed, but because I wasn't even asked. They planned a trip to Disneyland once, took the girls for spring break. Found out by accident. I overheard a conversation between the girls in the hallway. They were arguing about who would get the window seat on the plane. I smiled, thinking I'd be going too, but no one mentioned it. I waited, hoped. When the day came, they left before. Sunrise, no goodbye. I sat on the porch swing that evening, watching the street lamps come on. I stayed out there for hours. The wind smelled like jasmine. It wasn't hatred. I don't think they hated me. That would have been easier, cleaner. You can fight with someone who hates you, but neglect. It's different. Doesn't hit you like a punch. It just lingers, like mildew, like cold. I started going to bed earlier, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to be in the way. The later it got, the more it felt like I was trespassing. I'd hear them downstairs watching their shows, laughing. I'd lie in bed and trace the pattern of the ceiling, wondering when I became this. The extra, the afterthought. There was a point when I stopped asking to be included, stopped suggesting outings, stopped baking the things no one ate. I still showed up. I cleaned, I folded, and I fixed the things that broke. But a part of me was already retreating. I just didn't know it yet. Sometimes it was in the way they didn't look at me. Eye contact became rare. I'd speak and my words would float into the air like dust. No answer, just silence or a glance at a phone. They called it multitasking. I called it disappearing. I remember one night, just before bed, my granddaughter walked past me in the hallway and said, "You live here?" She wasn't being rude. She was just confused. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. I started going on walks. Early, before sunrise, the streets were empty, the lights soft and forgiving. I liked the stillness. It was the only time I felt like I existed without having to explain myself. I'd wave to the paper boy, pick up a croissant from the corner bakery, sit on a bench, and eat it slowly. Like I was someone else, someone not waiting to be remembered. And yet I stayed. Because where else was I supposed to go? I'd built that house with Alan, painted every wall, brought every child through its doors, buried the dog in the backyard. My roots weren't in the walls. They were in the floorboards, the cracks in the tile, the sun stains on the porch steps. Still, they moved around me like I wasn't there, like the furniture they didn't choose but couldn't get rid of yet. I became the hum of the refrigerator, the creak in the stairs, and the light that flickered in the hall. I didn't ask for anything grand. Not a ceremony, not applause, just to be seen. Just to matter. but 100 quiet hurts will teach you the truth even if no one speaks it aloud. They had stopped seeing me a long time ago, and I was finally beginning to see that too. It was a Tuesday, April, I think. The weather had just turned warm enough to open the windows. I remember the way the breeze moved through the curtains, slow and soft, like breath. I was in the kitchen, folding dish towels when I overheard them talking in the living room. They didn't know I was home. I'd come back early from my morning walk. The front door sticks sometimes, and they must not have heard it shut behind me. I wasn't eavesdropping, not at first. But when you hear your name said in that particular tone, the kind that sounds like a problem being solved, you stop what you're doing. She doesn't need the whole space, she said. My daughter-in-law, her voice was low and clipped. We could easily turn the back room into an office. She barely uses it. My son didn't say much. A grunt, maybe? Some kind of half nod I could imagine even without seeing. Then she added, "She won't mind. She's not even paying for anything. Eventually, it'll be ours anyway." That's when my hands froze. I held a folded towel against my chest, my fingers gone still in the terry cloth. I stood in the kitchen with my heart thudding like it used to when I'd watch Alan sleep in those last weeks, counting the space between breaths. Eventually, it'll be ours anyway. That sentence sat inside me like a stone. Not sharp, not dramatic, just heavy. Final, I didn't walk into the room. I didn't say a word, placed the towel on the counter, and went back to my room. Closed. The door quietly, the way they always seemed to prefer. Later that week, a contractor showed up. I was told he was just giving an estimate. They were thinking of knocking down a wall, expanding the kitchen maybe, making the home more open and modern. I nodded, smiled, went back to my garden. But that same day, I checked the mailbox. One of those long white envelopes was inside, the kind you don't expect unless you've been waiting for it. It was addressed to me, from the county assessor's office. Inside was a notice, a formal one, about the property. My property. It had been reassessed. New records updated. Occupancy status listed. A name added. Hers. I stood at the edge of the driveway and read it again, slower this time. They hadn't asked. They hadn't even mentioned it. Somewhere along the line, without a conversation, without even the dignity of a post-it note, my son had added his wife's name to the home address on file. It wasn't the deed. Not yet. But it was a breadcrumb. A trail was laid quietly, a plan set in motion. I didn't confront him. I knew what he would say, something logical, something gentle enough to pass as considerate. It's just for emergencies, he'd offer, to make paperwork easier, to protect you, and maybe that was true on some level. But it wasn't about logistics. It was about assumption, entitlement, the slow, silent belief that I was temporary, that my permit had expired. That night, I walked around the house and looked at everything differently. The books, they hadn't returned to their shelves. The coat rack that leaned with the weight of jackets I didn't recognize. The girls' backpacks were thrown against the wall. My sewing basket was tucked behind a filing cabinet. It was a museum of someone else's life, and I had become the unpaid docent. I opened the hall closet and stood there staring at the row of shoes. My slippers, once at the front, were now wedged in the back behind sneakers and toddler boots. I reached down to pull them forward and noticed something else. A file box. Black plastic, labeled neatly with a white sticker. House docs and finance. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Inside were copies of bank statements, loan applications, and something that made my breath catch. A printed draft of a mortgage pre-approval. My address was listed, but not my name. The borrower was my son. The cosigner was her. There it was in plain black ink. They were planning to refinance. To buy me out, I suppose. Or wait for the law to decide what they could claim once I was no longer standing in the way. It felt cold, professional, like I was the inconvenience in a transaction. I closed the box gently, put everything back. I walked into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked like it belonged to someone else, older than I remembered. Not angry, not sad, just thinned out. Like a photograph left too long in the sun. I didn't cry. I wish I had. Fie, sometimes the hurt is too wide for tears. Stretches across your chest like a stillness. It's like snow falling on a house you no longer recognize. The next day, I started going through my own paperwork. Slowly, quietly. I hadn't looked at the deed in years. It was still in my name. Alan had made sure of that before he passed. No cosigners, no transfer. The house was mine, clear and full. Paid off down to the last cent. I remember sitting at the kitchen table the day we got the final statement. He opened a bottle of red wine, kissed my temple, said, "We did it, Elle." I still have the cork. I called a lawyer. Not one they would know. A woman named Grace. Older, steady voice. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I said I had a dental appointment. Brought cookies home afterward to keep the story soft. Grace walked me through every possibility, every paper I'd need. Every right I still had, and every move they might try to make. I left her office with a folder tucked into my purse and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger. It was about naming what was mine, about not fading. Away so quietly that even the records stopped showing I'd ever existed in that house. I started keeping a journal again. Nothing dramatic, just small notes. What time they came home, who they had over, what furniture disappeared. Not out of spite, for memory, for truth. I was building a map of all the quiet ways they had begun to rewrite my presence out of the story. And still, I made dinner, still folded laundry, still kissed my granddaughters on their foreheads, and tucked them in when their parents stayed out late. But something had shifted. I no longer waited to be seen. I watched. I listened. I learned. And when the final line was crossed, when the house, my house, became just another line item in their plan, I knew, quietly and fully, that I would not be here when they thought they had arrived. They were preparing for a future that didn't include me. What they didn't know was that I had already begun preparing for a different future of my own. A future where I no longer had to explain why I kept disappearing inside a home I had built with my bare hands. A future where I no longer had to be small. A future where silence would no longer be mistaken for surrender. It didn't happen all at once. The silence started the way winter does. First a chill in the air, then a frost on the grass, until one morning, everything is covered in white and the world is quiet. At first, I just stopped making suggestions. I let them plan their weekends without my input. No more let me watch the girls for a bit, or should we try that new place in town? I became agreeable to the point of invisibility. I still smiled. I still offered a plate if I made dinner. I still answered questions when asked. But inside, something had slipped out of alignment. The kind of thing you don't notice unless you're paying attention. And they weren't. My daughter-in-law mentioned once that I seemed more laid back lately. She said it like a compliment. I laughed lightly and nodded. She had no idea I'd stopped participating, not because I was relaxed, but because I'd begun retreating. There's a difference between letting things go and letting go of yourself. I had spent years confusing the two. But now I was learning. Withdrew slowly, stopped folding the laundry that wasn't mine. Let the towels pile up. No one noticed. The hamper overflowed, and still no one said a word. I stopped baking. The kitchen grew quiet. No scent of cinnamon or banana bread. No stew bubbling on the stove. One evening I sat in my room and heard them open the fridge. Someone mumbled, "Nothing to eat," and they ordered takeout. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just took note. I began writing again. Not in any dramatic way, just a few lines a night. A notebook kept under my bed. I wrote about small things, the way the maple tree outside. My window was starting to leaf out, and the way the floors creaked louder now that no one waited to walk gently. I wrote about my dreams. I had them still. That surprised me. One was about a little cottage near the coast. White shutters, a blue mailbox. I didn't know if such a place existed, but I saw it clearly, like it had been waiting for me. I remembered things I hadn't let myself think about in years. Like how, after Alan died, I used to fantasize about driving north without telling anyone, filling a bag with clothes and disappearing for a while. Not to run from grief, but to live outside its shadow. I never did it. I stayed. Always stayed. That word stay had been the cornerstone of my identity. Stay home, stay quiet, stay useful, stay gracious. But what do you do when the staying starts to hollow you out? One morning, while they were out, I opened the hope chest at the foot of my bed. It had been Alan's grandmother's. Inside were old tax records, letters, our marriage license, and a faded baby blanket. I sat cross-legged on the floor and spread everything out. I held our deed in my hands. My name's still the only one on it. I traced the edge of the paper with my thumb and felt something inside me steady. That night, I emailed Grace, the lawyer. I told her I was ready to move forward. Her reply came quickly. Calm, thorough. She said we'd proceed quietly without notice. I started researching realtors in secret, not flashy ones. Just women with soft voices and kind faces. I found one named Carla, who returned my message with a handwritten note dropped in my mailbox. Whenever you're ready, it said, no pressure. I liked her instantly. I met with her during their work hours. The girls were at school. I made Carla tea, and we sat on the back porch like old friends. She didn't flinch when I told her what I was planning. She just nodded and said, let's take our time. You get to do this on your terms. I hadn't heard that in years. On your terms, I started going to the library again. Not just to check out books, but to sit in the silence, surrounded by people who didn't expect anything from me. I liked the feeling of being alone without being lonely. One afternoon, I found a book on coastal towns in Oregon. I checked it out and spent an entire evening turning down pages. That was when the dream started to change. The cottage appeared again. Same blue mailbox. But this time I was inside it, sitting by a window, knitting something yellow while rain fell. No one was waiting for me. No one needed anything. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like a gift. I stopped reminding them to lock the back gate. She stopped watering the plants she brought home but forgot to care for. I watched as they withered. The ivy in the kitchen, the one I'd kept alive for 12 years, drooped and browned. I could have saved it, but I didn't. Some things I was learning deserved to die their own deaths. They began to sense something eventually. My son asked if I was okay. I smiled, said I was just tired, which was true, in a way. Tired of waiting, tired of proving. Tired of proving the scaffolding for a home I was no longer welcome in. I wasn't angry. That part surprised me the most. I expected rage, but all I felt was a kind of clean sorrow. Not the kind that clings. The kind that clarifies. I had kept everything running for so long, I hadn't noticed how little of it belonged to me anymore. The house was no longer mine. Not in feeling, not in rhythm. But the deed said otherwise, and that mattered. One night, I printed a list, just 3 columns, what I want to keep, what I'll give away, what I'll leave behind. I sat with it for hours. The pink mixing bowl for my wedding registry made the keep list. So did a photo of Alan holding the dog in the duggan. Backyard, both of them grinning like fools. The list of what I would leave behind was longer. It didn't make me sad, it made me light. I stopped answering when they called my name from the other room. If it wasn't important, I let it float unanswered. I was done leaping to serve, done filling silence with service, done being the wallpaper to their life. The more I withdrew, the more they noticed. She left a note on my door one evening. Everything okay? It read, in bubbly handwriting. I didn't answer, not out of spite, just because nothing I could say would explain it. Everything wasn't okay, but it would be. I spent one afternoon sitting in the backyard, watching the light move through the trees. I took my shoes off and let the grass touch my feet. I hadn't done that in years. It felt like remembering. I was still here, but not for long. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is the first step out the door. I started by clearing one drawer. Just one. It was the third one down in the hallway. Dresser, the one that stuck a little when you pulled it too fast? It held a mishmash of things. Expired coupons, Alan's old glasses, child's drawing that had no name on it, and a tangle of cords I could no longer match to anything. I sorted quietly, tossing what was done and folding what was mine. Was the kind of task that didn't make noise but still made a mark. That's how I move now. Not with announcement, but with intention. That drawer was my line in the sand. Each day after that, I cleared one more thing. Shelf in the pantry. A pile of books I hadn't touched in 10 years. The bottom of the coat closet where I found my old boots was cracked with dust but still standing. I didn't ask anyone where they wanted things to go. I didn't offer items or explanations. I boxed up what I would take, set aside what I'd leave, gave away nothing yet. I didn't want questions. Not yet. Not from people who had gone so long without really asking me anything that mattered. I began walking longer in the mornings. Not just around the block, but through neighborhoods I didn't recognize. I'd take turns at corners that didn't feel familiar. Let myself get gently lost. It was freeing, being unknown in a place. No history, no expectations. On one of those walks, I passed a small church with a cracked bell tower and a hand-painted sign out front. Tuesdays, it said, "Bread and coffee. No sermon, no strings. Just come." I went the next week. No one asked who I lived with. No one asked where I belonged. They handed me warm bread and called me by my name after the first hour. I didn't tell my family about it. Felt too pure to share. Around that same time, I opened a separate bank account. Grace had suggested it, said it was wise, not sneaky. I took $50 out at first, just enough to make it real. Then more, as the weeks passed, a little from here, a little from there. Grocery money they never tracked. Birthday cash from relatives who still remembered I had a mailbox. I wasn't stealing. I was reclaiming. One afternoon, Carla, the realtor, called to say she'd found someone, a buyer, a woman named May in her early 50s, divorced, teacher, wanted to retire, somewhere quiet. She loved the bones of the house, loved the garden especially. She said she could feel history in the walls. I asked Carla if she told May the current family still lived there. She said yes. And that May had nodded and said, "Well, I guess we all move on in our own time." That was when I knew. The house was ready to be someone else's again. Papers came 2 weeks later. They sat unopened on my dresser for 3 days. I didn't rush. I'd waited long enough to do this on my terms. When I finally signed, it was raining outside. The kind of soft, insistent rain that doesn't demand attention, just asks for your quiet agreement. I watched it tap against the window, and I signed every page slowly, like a promise. No one in the house knew. Not yet. I didn't hide it, but I didn't say it out loud. Silence had become my language, not the bitter kind, not the vengeful kind, but the kind that blooms when truth finally grows too large to be contained in small conversations. I moved through the house differently after that. I stood taller in the kitchen. I made tea with both hands. I hummed again, not to anyone, just to myself. I went into the backyard one morning and sat with my coffee on the steps. The dogwood tree Alan planted was beginning to bloom again. White flowers against a gray sky. It looked how I felt. New in ways no one else could see. Later that day, I took the sewing machine out of the garage, dusted it off, rethreaded the needle, started making napkins. Not for them, for the new place. Linen ones, stitched at the edges with a soft wave pattern. I didn't tell them about the buyer until the closing date was set. Even then, I didn't do it with drama. We were sitting at the dinner table. The girls were bickering over screen time. My son had his phone out. She was talking over everyone about a school fundraiser. I waited for the right moment. It never came, so I made one. I sold the house, I said. It took a second for them to hear me. My son looked up. She paused mid-sentence. I signed the papers last week. I continued. It closes next Friday. The room went still, but not quiet. Emotion buzzed around like a static charge. My son opened his mouth and closed it. She laughed, short, confused. What do you mean? Sold? I said, I won't be here after Friday. Neither will you. I didn't raise my voice, didn't tremble. I said it the way one reads a trainschedule.com, unavoidable. She stood up. My son blinked like someone waking from a long sleep. I finished my tea. They asked questions of course, some sharp, some stunned. I let them answered what I felt like. Refused the rest. I didn't owe them more than the truth. That night I slept soundly. First time in months. They scrambled, of course, panicked, called people. Tried to understand the legality. But there was nothing to undo. It had all been handled cleanly, quietly, the way they'd made decisions without me for years. I wasn't cruel. I gave them 30 days to move. Left a note on the fridge with the timeline. They didn't thank me. I didn't expect them to. In the meantime, I packed my things with care. Labeled each box. Not much, really. Most of what was here had long since stopped being mine. I kept Alan's cork collection, the pink bowl, my mother's rosary beads, a few quilts, the rest. I let go of. I found a small place in Astoria, 1 bedroom, sliver of ocean out the back window. The woman who owns it used to be a nurse, loves birds. She offered to leave the wind chimes hanging on the porch. I said yes. Carla helped me move. Grace called to congratulate me. And when I left, I didn't say goodbye the way they wanted. I left a letter on the mantel. No anger, no accusations. Just one line. I stayed longer than I should have. Won't make that mistake again. The lock clicked behind me with a sound I'll never forget. Not heavy, not angry, just finished. I didn't cry. I walked to the corner and waited for the car that would take me to the life I chose. And I knew, deep down, I had not burned the house down. I had simply turned off the lights and walked away. The first morning in the new place, I woke before the sun. Not out of habit, but out of ease. The quiet here felt different. Not heavy like the silence I knew in the old house. This was the kind that settled softly around your shoulders. Light, clean, honest. I made coffee in a small ceramic pot. I used to sit in Alan's workshop. It still had a little chip in the handle, just enough to remind me it had survived something. Like me, there was no sound of footsteps on the stairs. No murmured conversations behind closed doors. No morning cartoons humming from the living room. Just the low creak of old wood floors and the rustle of wind outside the kitchen window. I stood barefoot, sipping slowly, letting the warmth reach the parts of me that had gone cold long before I'd left. It had been 3 weeks since the sale. Closed, 30 days had passed, and they were gone. Packed up, moved out, scattered somewhere I didn't ask about. I hadn't spoken to them since, not because I was punishing them. I just didn't have anything left to explain. My leaving wasn't a protest. It was a release. I don't know exactly when they began to feel my absence. Maybe it was immediate. Maybe it took days. People get used to things they don't value until those things vanish, like air conditioning, or the porch light that always worked, or the way toilet paper never seemed to run out. From what I heard, and yes, word still travels even in silence, didn't go smoothly for them. The buyer, May, gave them more than enough time to vacate, but I heard she was firm, polite but unwavering. She changed the locks the morning after they left, had the walls painted before the week was out, tore down the baby gate, put my sunflower cup back at the front of the cabinet, The little girls must have asked why they couldn't go back. I imagine how they tried to explain it without saying my name, without saying she left us. But I didn't leave them. They left me years before I ever turned the key in that lock for the last time. I didn't feel pride about what I did. Not the puffed up kind, anyway. But I did feel something firmer than pride, a rootedness. Like my feet had finally returned to solid ground after years of drifting. I kept to myself, mostly. The new place had no room for ghosts, and I didn't bring any with me. I unpacked only what I needed. One box of photos, a few sweaters, my favorite mug, the rest I donated or let go of entirely. The landlord, Janet, was kind. She brought over a pie on my second day and told me the neighborhood was quiet but not dull. A few retirees, some artists, and a retired librarian with a cat named Brisket who liked to sun himself on the shared fence. It was the kind of place where no one asked where you'd been, only if you wanted to come along. There was a coat market. 4 blocks down, I started shopping there on Wednesdays, met a woman who sold homemade soaps and played bluegrass on Saturdays in the park. We talked one morning over peaches and ended up walking together twice a week. Her name was Ruth, widowed for 10 years. Said grief comes and goes like weather, but dignity is something you have to water yourself. I liked her immediately. Meanwhile, back in the town I left behind, things began to shift. My son called once, blocked number, left a voicemail. Oh. We need to talk. He didn't say thank you, didn't say sorry. It's just need. I didn't call back, not out of punishment, but peace. I'd spent decades answering needs that never turned back into care. My energy wasn't available for rent anymore. A friend from the library, one of the only ones I still spoke to, told me she'd seen my daughter-in-law at the hardware store. Said she looked tired, overworked, muttering about needing space. The irony didn't even sting. It's just settled over me like dust on a closed book. The truth is, I had been holding more than they realized. Not just the bills, the groceries, and the laundry. I was the breath between arguments, the buffer between tension. The gentle presence that made things feel steady even when they weren't. I was the quiet background rhythm that made their lives feel more composed than they truly were. And now, without it, the imbalance showed. I heard the girls missed me. That one of them cried when she couldn't find the blanket I had sewn for her, the one with the purple edging and mismatched patches. She used to drag it behind her down the hallway like a tail. I thought about mailing it to her. I did. I even folded it and put it in a box. But something stopped me. Not bitterness. Okay. Just knowing that sometimes when people let go of something too easily, you don't return it to their hands. You let them learn the weight of losing it. I wrote letters, though, not to send, just to clear the air inside me. One to my son, where I told him I still loved him, but I no longer recognized him. That a mother can forgive 1,000 things, but not being erased. One to Alan, where I described the new porch light and the way the sea sounded through the window at night. I think he would have liked it here. He would have laughed at the bird that keeps tapping the kitchen window each morning like clockwork. I kept those letters in a drawer. Not because I needed them, it's because I no longer needed to speak them aloud. The town here moves at a slower rhythm. I started volunteering on Thursdays, helping sort books at a used shop that funds a women's shelter. No one there asks what you used to be. They just ask what time you can arrive and if you want coffee while you shelve the paperbacks. It's the kind of grace I never thought to ask for. Some nights I sit on the small back porch, a wool blanket across my knees, and I think about all the noise I used to live in, all the trying, all the effort it took to stay worthy in someone else's home. No, I don't have to earn my presence. I just have to live it. I can't say what they lost exactly. That's theirs to name. Or not. But I know what I gained. It's a place where I am not an afterthought. It's a life not measured by how much I give without being asked how much it takes. They may have lost a lot, but I didn't take anything from them. I simply stopped offering it. And in that space, I found myself again. It was mid-October when the wind shifted. Not just outside, but inside me. The trees had begun their slow, gold collapse, a kind of quiet brilliance. I watched leaves fall like they'd finally given themselves permission. That's what it felt like. Permission to let go. Without performance, without apology. I'd lived in the new place for months by then. I knew the rhythm of the floorboards, the stubborn cabinet latch that stuck on humid days, and the sound the gate made when Ruth came by with her walking stick tapping the ground like a metronome. I knew when the sun hit the back window just right. It turned the floor into a canvas of light and lace. And I knew with a certainty that didn't need to be spoken that I wasn't going back. Not in body, not in memory. But healing has its own way of circling back, doesn't it? It was a Sunday, the kind of cold that smells like wood smoke and wet earth. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open, a pen resting. Across the spine, I hadn't written in days. Not out of forgetfulness, just stillness. There was no more ache pressing against the seams. No more sharpness demanding to be bled out through ink. But that morning, something nudged me. Not pain, not even grief. Just a need to face something that had long been waiting in the dark corners. I tore a fresh page from the notebook and dated it at the top. No salutation, no dear, just the page and me. I wrote the first sentence slowly, the way you might step into cold water inch by inch, till your breath finds a way to settle. I forgive you. I paused, let the ink dry. The letter was not to my son, not to my daughter-in-law, not even to Alan, though I'd written to him before. This letter was to her, the one I had been, the woman who stayed too long, the woman who folded other people's laundry in silence and smiled at being forgotten. I wrote to her like she was still somewhere nearby, like she hadn't already dissolved into the mist of memory and effort. I told her I was sorry. Sorry for how often I made her small, how often I shushed her instincts, how I taught her that patience was the same as peace, that sacrifice was a virtue even when it left her hollow. I told her I admired her for how long she carried everyone, for how deeply she loved even when it was unspoken, unrewarded, and unnoticed, for how she kept making birthdays special long after no one remembered hers, for how she kept a soft heart even while being chipped away by years of quiet dismissal. I forgave her for what she accepted. I praised her for what she endured. And then I released her. I let her walk, in my mind, out of that house and into the garden. I imagined her barefoot, warm soil beneath her. She looked back at me once. I smiled at her. She smiled back. We didn't need to say anything. We knew the letter went on for 3 pages. Not dramatic. It's just honest. A soft inventory of years lived half-lit. And the quiet bloom that followed when the light finally came in full. At the end, I wrote, "You didn't fail. You waited too long, yes, but you left, and that matters more than all the time you stayed." I signed it with my name. Not Mom, not Lola, not Mrs. Hart, just Eleanor. Like I was meeting myself again. When I finished, I folded the letter neatly, as if I were going to mail it somewhere. But there was nowhere to send it. No address for the past. No postbox for the version of me that had vanished. Instead, I took it outside. The wind was soft that day, just enough to lift the edges of the paper as I held it over the old clay fire pit Janet had left behind. I struck a match, lit the corner, and let it go. The paper curled and darkened, words disappearing into smoke and sky. Not in anger, not in pain, but in grace. Ashes fell like gray feathers. I watched until the last ember glowed out. And I felt different, not new, not healed, in some glossy to clean way. Just different. Lighter. Later that evening, I sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl Ruth had knitted for me. She didn't know the story. She just knew I liked soft things in quiet colors. She said something once that stuck with me. You don't have to retell the whole story to be free from it. Sometimes you just have to stop carrying the ending. They gave you the letter was that for me? A way of putting the ending down, not erasing it. It's just no longer letting it hold the pen. I made dinner that night with music playing low on the radio. Rosemary potatoes, a little chicken and roasted. Carrots, enough for one, just enough. No one asked what I was doing. No one asked why I was quiet or what was wrong. And for the first time, I realized how peaceful it felt to not be managing the emotions of others while swallowing your own. Peace wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It was a bowl of food you made for yourself because you wanted to. It was a single plate on the table, a cloth napkin, and the smell of rosemary rising into a room that finally belonged only to you. The next morning, I walked by the ocean. Tide was pulling in steady and low. I picked up a shell, small and broken on one side. I kept it anyway. Beautiful things don't need to be whole to be worthy. When I got back home, I put the shell on the windowsill above the sink. It caught the light just right. A reminder, maybe, that even the pieces we think are past usefulness still have something to offer. That letter changed me. Not because it gave me closure, but because it gave me permission. Permission to be proud, to be still, to be mine. I don't know if I'll ever hear from them again. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. That part doesn't feel like it belongs to me anymore. What does belong to me is the way I breathe now, the way I walk into a room without wondering if I'm in the way, the way I don't flinch when the phone doesn't ring. I don't need to be missed to matter, okay? And I don't need to go back to prove I was ever there. I was, and I left a letter behind to honor the woman who finally chose herself. My days are smaller now, but they feel full in a way they never did before. The mornings begin early, not because they must, but because I like them that way. The air comes through the windows, cool and clean, carrying the scent of salt from the nearby water. I take it in slowly, sitting with a mug of coffee at the little kitchen table. Watching the world rise with a kind of gentleness that never existed in the old house. No one expects me anywhere. No one is waiting for pancakes or a clean uniform or carpool instructions. I am not on anyone's list anymore, and somehow that feels like relief instead of erasure. I walk every day like a ritual. Not for exercise, not to measure distance, but to feel the rhythm of my feet on solid ground. There's a narrow path behind the cottage that winds down toward the shore. Seagrass lines the edges. Sometimes the fog comes in so thick I can barely see where the path ends, but I walk it anyway. I've learned that not seeing the next step doesn't mean you're lost. Along the way, I've come to recognize the sound of birds I never knew by name. The low hum of gulls circling, the warble of something small in the trees near the fence. Nature doesn't rush to be noticed, and I've stopped rushing to be needed. There's a bench at the halfway point, weathered and crooked, with initials carved into the wood. I sit there often. Sometimes I bring a book, but most days I just listen. Let the wind tangle my hair. Let the quiet teach me something I never learned while living for everyone else. In the afternoons, I tend to the garden. I started in late August, a small one. It's just tomatoes, basil, and a few herbs I haven't quite mastered. The soil here is rich but stubborn, like me. The plants grow slowly. Sometimes they surprise me. Sometimes they don't. I'm learning that not everything needs to bloom on schedule. I keep a notebook by the sink, not to record chores, but thoughts. Little lines that come to me like the tide. Uninvited but welcome. I don't share them with anyone. They're mine. For once, I get to be the only witness to what I create. I still get mail from people who haven't heard. An old cousin. Neighbor from the church. Cards come in with cursive handwriting and words like thinking of you. Sometimes I respond. Sometimes I don't. I don't owe anyone the full version of what happened. Some endings are better left soft and unexplained. I heard from my youngest daughter last month. A short letter, nothing weighty. She didn't mention the house. She just said she hoped I was well. She told me she was going through a hard time. I read it twice, thought about what it meant, thought about how hard it must have been to write even that much. I wrote her back, not to fix anything, not to open old doors, just to let her know I was still here, that she could find me if she needed to, but I wouldn't be waiting at the threshold anymore. Some days, I wonder if they think about me, my son, the girls, her, the one who called me a visitor. I wonder if they pass the old house and feel anything. I wonder if they miss the way the sheets were always folded into the closet before they thought to ask, the way dinner used to appear like magic, the way things felt steady even if they didn't know why. I don't dwell on it. I just let the thought come and go, like wind through lace curtains. Nothing sharp. Nothing that stays. The sea helps. There's something about its honesty. Comes and goes without apology. It takes what it needs and gives what it can. I sit near it most evenings, wrapped in an old cardigan, letting the cold press gently against my bones. That's when I feel it the most. That quiet that isn't lonely. That emptiness that isn't absence. The kind of peace that doesn't perform. I don't miss the noise. Not the clatter of a house that never stopped moving. Not the voices that needed so much from me without ever asking how much I had left. I miss little things. The way Alan used to stir his coffee with a spoon even after the sugar dissolved. It's the way my granddaughter would tuck her fingers into the crook of my arm when she was tired. It's the sound of rain on the old roof when I was the only one awake. Missing doesn't mean longing. Just means you once had something worth remembering. Sometimes Ruth comes over for tea. She doesn't ask questions. She knits while I slice fruit. We don't talk about the past. We talk about birds and weather and once. About the way certain people only love you as long as you don't ask them to see you clearly. I nodded when she said that. We understand each other in the way only women do who have been the backbone of too many rooms and the voice that was always softened to avoid offense. I go to sleep now with the window cracked open. The wind moves through the room like breath. I dream less about being needed and more about being free. I don't wake up with lists in my head. I wake up with space. There's a quote I copied from a book into my notebook. A woman who chooses herself is a quiet revolution. I don't know who wrote it, but I know I lived it. I didn't leave because I stopped loving them. I left because I started loving myself. That love came slow, like a tide. Like a letter unsent for too long, but it came. And now I live in a small house by the sea, where I water plants that don't bloom out of obligation. Where I cook only when I'm hungry, or I laugh sometimes, just because the light falls through the curtain a certain way. My life is quiet now. There's no applause, no audience. Just breathe. Just sky. Just me. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty. And that was beautiful. The truth is, I don't think I ever believed I'd get here. Not just the cottage, not the garden or the sea air, but here. This version of myself no longer flinches at an empty room and no longer waits for someone to knock and need me. For a long time, I didn't know you could arrive somewhere without anyone noticing and still feel like it was the most important journey of your life. The house I live in now has no upstairs, no hallway lined with children's photos, and no evidence of birthdays or graduations or sleepy school mornings. There are no scuff marks on the wall where growth was measured, no tangled pile of shoes by the front door, and no mail addressed to more than one name. There's only this life, and mine. I've made peace with the quiet, not the silence I once knew, the one thick with disappointment and small betrayals dressed up as family. No, this quiet is more honest, more alive. It doesn't ask me to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's comfort. Here, I don't wonder who I am when no one is watching, because now I'm always watching myself. Every little thing I do carries weight again. Boiling water for tea, trimming the dead leaves off the basil plant, and choosing the blue sweater instead of the gray. These things matter in ways I never realized I'd missed. When you live your life for others for too long, your own needs begin to feel like interruptions. But now, even my sighs feel like they belong. The shell on the windowsill, the broken one I found on the beach, has started to fade in the sun. Its once purple edge is now pale as fog, but I keep it there anyway. Not for what it used to be, but for what it reminds me of. That something can be fractured and still stay whole in your hands. Some days I hear children playing from the neighboring yard. It's just a boy and a girl, siblings, maybe. Laughing in that wild, unhindered way only children can. I don't watch too closely. I just let the sound reach me. I sit on the porch with my book open, and I let the laughter drift through me like wind through tall grass. I don't ache. I don't wish. I only remember. There is power in remembering. Without needing to return, the phone rings less these days. Not because I've cut people off. It's just because I no longer orbit their world. Some ties frayed, some snapped. Some I let go of with a quiet nod, like a passenger stepping off the wrong bus with no bitterness, only clarity. My oldest daughter emailed once, a short message. She heard I'd moved. Asked if I was okay. There was no warmth in the words, but no cruelty either. Just distance dressed in civility. I didn't write back. I didn't ignore her either. I simply let the message be what it was. A note left on a door I had already walked through, closed gently behind me. We don't owe people a return just because they finally noticed we were gone. Ruth came by yesterday with apple jam and a pair of wool socks she'd knit for the colder days coming. She left them in a paper bag by the door and knocked twice. As always, then stepped back like a respectful ritual. I invited her in, we drank tea and played a short game of cards. Neither of us spoke about the past. She never asks. And I've come to realize how rare that is. To be with someone who honors your presence without dissecting your path. After she left, I sat by the window and watched the sun slip behind the trees. The shadows here are longer than where I used to live softer. They move with a kind of grace, like they know their place isn't to linger, only to pass through. That night, I wrote something new. Not a letter, just a line in my journal. I no longer live in the house they think I left. I live in the one I found inside myself. It's true. The real home I was looking for wasn't behind any front door. It wasn't built with drywall and window panes and inheritance. It wasn't passed down. It was grown. In me, quietly, while no one was watching. The house I live in now. The one no map could lead me to. Has no address I can offer them. No invitation I need to send. And even if they came knocking, I'm not sure they'd recognize me anymore. I'm not the woman who folded towels in silence while resentment thickened in her throat. I'm not the one who waited at the edge of a dinner table for someone to remember she was still in the room. I'm not the one who gave without limit and called it love because she didn't know there could be a boundary. I'm Eleanor Hart. I am 69 years old. And for the first time, I'm not performing the part of someone's mother or someone's placeholder or someone's memory of who I used to be. I am simply myself. No titles, no apologies. No service required. This morning, I cut flowers from the little garden bed I planted. They weren't perfect. Leaning a bit, petals misshapen. But I arranged them in an old mason jar and placed them in the center of the table. I didn't wait for guests. I didn't take a photo to send. I didn't do it to be seen. Did it because I wanted to. I lit a candle, made toast with peach, preserves. Sat down and looked out the window, where the trees were beginning their slow golden fade again. Seasons pass whether we're ready or not. But this time, I'm not bracing for the cold. I've built a fire in my own soul. One I tend every day with gentle hands. One no one can take from me. And when people ask, though they rarely do now, how I ended up here, I simply say this. I stopped asking for a place in a story that no longer made room for me. I closed the chapter even when they left it half-written. I put down the pen and I walked myself home.